Jackson stood before the glass door of his own cafe, motionless, as if the world had paused with him. The summer heat pressed against his skin, soaking the back of his borrowed delivery uniform with sweat. The logo stitched onto the fabric looked alien, like a stranger had walked into his life wearing a borrowed identity. This was his cafe, his vision. Yet somehow, he didn't belong here anymore. He pushed open the door, expecting a wave of recognition, perhaps a smile from someone who once knew his name, but the inside felt colder than the outside. The clang of the door shutting echoed louder than any welcome. A young waitress barely looked up before delivering her verdict. Her voice was flat, mechanical. "We're not serving delivery drivers. Try somewhere else." That was it. No curiosity, no hesitation, just dismissal. Jackson froze. It wasn't what she said, but how quickly she said it. As if she'd practiced those words. As if people in uniforms like his had become a regular inconvenience. The silence in the cafe was suffocating, an invisible wall that pushed him back toward the exit. He left without a word, the door shutting behind him like a final judgment. Outside, people drifted past him, unaware. Above him, his name gleamed in polished metal letters, once a symbol of hope, now a bitter irony. This was supposed to be a place where everyone mattered. But today, Jackson realized he was just another face in the crowd, a nobody outside his own dream. He stood there, eyes locked on the name he'd once fought to carve into the city. Years ago, that name meant something. Back then, he wore this same kind of jacket, not as a disguise, but because it was the only one he owned. He remembered long nights, empty pockets, and the ache in his feet after double shifts. He remembered being invisible, passed over, unacknowledged. It was those memories that had driven him to create this cafe, his sanctuary for the overlooked, a place where tired workers could rest without shame, without judgment. But something had shifted. He looked down at his uniform now. Nothing had changed about it, but everything about the cafe had, or maybe the people had. His staff, the values, the heart. He swallowed hard. The sweat on his brow stung his eyes, but it wasn't just the heat, it was betrayal. Quiet, creeping betrayal. The kind that grows silently when no one is watching. And Jackson had stopped watching. What hurt more? Who he used to be, or what his cafe had become? He couldn't tell. His hands hung at his sides like forgotten tools, and his breath slowed as if his body was trying to vanish with him. Inside, a single thought looped endlessly. I used to be a delivery driver. Today, they kicked me out of my own cafe. His vision blurred, not from tears, but from a disbelief too heavy to process. He caught his reflection in the glass. The man staring back wasn't a stranger. He was a ghost. Same face, but stripped of belonging. He had created this place for people like him, for workers and wanderers, for the overlooked. Now, standing outside, he felt like a shadow in broad daylight, present but unseen. He closed his eyes. A voice from years ago echoed in his mind. Success changes people. But maybe it wasn't success. Maybe it was comfort, or neglect, or letting go without meaning to. He shook his head. Maybe failure changes them more. A single step back, then another. He stood still, unsure if what he felt was anger or shame. He remembered opening day, the way his voice cracked from excitement as he greeted his first customers, telling them this place was for everyone. Suit or uniform, it didn't matter. He had believed that. Every smile had mattered. Every tired face reminded him of his own. The scent of fresh paint, the whir of the first coffee grinder, the wooden sign he carved with his hands. Welcome all. It still hung by the door, now faded and forgotten, like the promise he made. Jackson's jaw tightened. His cafe hadn't just lost its way, it had betrayed its soul. And the worst part? He let it happen. His hand trembled slightly as he pulled out his phone and opened the review app. The screen lit up like a confession booth. 1 star. Got kicked out for wearing my delivery uniform. Not the kind of customer they serve. He scrolled. Another. Then another. The stories echoed his own. Words like ignored, disrespected, denied. It wasn't a fluke. It was a pattern. The cafe hadn't just turned its back on him. It had turned its back on everything he built it for. His fingers clenched around the phone, knuckles whitening. He wanted to believe this was just an error, a miscommunication. But truth doesn't whisper, it screams. And today, he had heard it loud and clear. Then came the numbers. Inventory logs, costs, premium ingredients, salmon, steak, truffle oil. Jackson frowned. His cafe wasn't fine dining. Why were they burning through luxuries? He remembered confronting Phil, the assistant manager. Food costs look high. Anything wrong? Phil had smiled, casual and easy. Boss, inflation's killing us all. Jackson had nodded, trusted him. Now that trust tasted like ash. The math didn't add up, and Jackson didn't need to be an accountant to know when something smelled rotten. Somewhere along the way, someone was bleeding his cafe dry. And today's rejection was just the surface. He stared at the door one last time, then turned away. Enough. He wouldn't ask questions. He'd find the answers himself. Numbers don't lie. And neither did that waitress's eyes. That night, Jackson returned home in silence. The city lights flickered outside his window as he opened an old storage box. Inside lay the past he thought he'd buried. His delivery cap, his jacket, his worn-out shoes. One by one, he put them on. Not to hide, but to remember. Tomorrow, he would walk back through those doors, not as an owner, but as a ghost of who he used to be. Unseen, unheard, but watching everything. He stood in front of his mirror. The man staring back looked nothing like the owner of a thriving cafe. He looked like the man who once dreamed of building one, and somewhere beneath the weight of disappointment, that dream still burned. Jackson zipped up his old delivery bag, now patched and frayed. The smell of grease and city sweat still clung to it like a second skin. The sleeves of his jacket felt tighter, heavier with the weight of memory, but he embraced it, because tomorrow he would return, not to own, but to uncover, and what he was about to find would be worse than anything he ever expected. For a fleeting moment, doubt whispered in Jackson's ear. Maybe he had misunderstood. Maybe things weren't as broken as they seemed. But he tightened the strap of his delivery bag, firm as a soldier readying for battle. No more waiting, no more excuses. Today, he wouldn't ask for answers. He would earn them, with his eyes open and his silence sharpened into observation. He stepped outside, the familiar city air brushing against his face. Each footstep carried weight, not just from the bag slung across his back, but from everything he had built and now questioned. He turned the corner, bypassing the front. He wasn't welcome there anymore. Instead, he took the narrow alley, skirting past greasy dumpsters and cigarette butts. To the back door, the one he once insisted must always remain open for deliveries. It welcomed him like it used to. No questions, no gatekeepers. The metal creaked open into a different world. Steam rising from pots, orders shouted above clattering pans, the rhythm of a kitchen in full sprint. No one looked up. To them, he was nobody. A delivery guy, disposable, invisible. And today, invisibility was power. Jackson lingered at the edge of the hallway, heart hammering. Not from fear, from knowing, from watching the very people whose salaries he paid rush by him like he didn't exist. A waitress brushed past, eyes locked on her tray. The chef gave a half-second glance, then dismissed him entirely. He had vanished in plain sight, but Jackson didn't come to be seen. He came to see. The scent caught him first. Rich, decadent, far beyond anything listed on the cafe's modest chalkboard menu. Garlic seared in butter, fresh herbs wilting under heat. the crisp sting of white wine evaporating in a hot pan, and truffle oil. Jackson's brow furrowed. He knew that aroma. Years in kitchens taught him the language of smell. That dish didn't belong here. He moved closer to the kitchen door, pressing his body to the frame, listening. Laughter. Not stress-laced chuckles, but full, relaxed laughter. Plates clinked gently, not with the rush of service, but the ease of indulgence. He peered through the small gap in the swinging door. Salmon glistened under golden butter, creamy risottos, perfectly seared steaks with pepper crusts. His heart sank. These dishes, these ingredients, weren't served to customers. He'd never approved these recipes. Yet here they were, sliding out from his kitchen. He watched a waitress, bright smile, smooth steps, carry 2 of those plates. But she didn't turn to the main floor. She walked toward the private booths, the ones he'd originally designed for community seating. Instead, 2 sharply dressed men occupied them, clearly not regulars. The staff watched them eat, almost reverently. Then Jackson saw it. Another plate passed quietly to the staff table. Not stolen scraps, full plates, expensive cuts, his employees eating like elite guests. His stomach churned. This wasn't generosity. This was theft, dressed in entitlement. Jackson kept walking, eyes wide behind his lowered head. At the front, a man in a construction vest entered, dust on his boots. Tired but hopeful, he waited for a table. The hostess's smile dissolved instantly. "We're full," she said. Jackson stared past her. Empty tables waited behind her, untouched. The man nodded quietly and left, shame bending his shoulders. A few minutes later, another delivery driver stepped in, wearing a uniform nearly identical to Jackson's. Same rejection. Same lie. "No walk-ins right now, sorry." Then Jackson saw it, the contrast that shattered him. A man in a tailored suit entered. Clean lines, gold watch. The hostess greeted him like royalty, seated him instantly, offered wine without hesitation. Jackson couldn't breathe. His cafe wasn't failing out of disorganization. It was curating its clientele. It was choosing who was worthy of being fed. He stepped deeper into the shadows. Numb. This wasn't about a bad day. This wasn't about a few impolite staff. It was a system. Serve the rich, reject the workers. He remembered a cruel phrase from his old manager. Some customers aren't worth the table. Back then, Jackson had sworn he would build a place that believed the opposite. Now his own team had drawn the same line. At the hostess stand, he spotted something. A clipboard. Curious, he edged closer, catching a glimpse of a handwritten list. Drivers, construction, no tips, tourists. Each word was marked with a red X. His chest constricted. This wasn't attitude, it was policy. A blacklist, not of behavior, but of identity, of who deserved to be served. His fingers clenched. He felt the foundation of his dream crack under him. He stepped forward, slow, heart pounding. "Can I get a glass of water?" he asked softly. The waitress looked up, blank. "For staff and customers only." I'm waiting on an order," Jackson added, voice catching. She rolled her eyes. "Then wait outside." The rejection wasn't loud, but it echoed through him like thunder. Not because of what she said, but because he remembered exactly how it felt. Years ago, he'd stood in this same silence, in a different jacket, asking for the same kindness, receiving the same refusal. Jackson turned away, his throat dry, not from thirst, but from history repeating itself. He stepped out into the sunlight. It hit his face but brought no warmth. And there, he saw him. A young delivery driver, barely 20, holding his phone, eyes tired, sweat on his neck, waiting not just for an order, but for a chance to be seen. Their eyes met. A heartbeat passed between them. Jackson saw himself. The boy looked down and turned away. Jackson couldn't speak. His voice was locked somewhere beneath the weight of regret. The door shut behind him, severing the thread between past and present. Inside, laughter rose from the kitchen. Outside, Jackson stood still, not as an owner, not as a leader, but as a man who had watched his younger self walk away hungry. He leaned against the wall, eyes closed, pulled back through time, back to when he had no name on a building, just raw hands, long hours, and hope. Hope that the world might change. Now, he had the power to make that change, and he had betrayed it. Jackson opened his eyes, stared at his trembling hands. They weren't young anymore, but they still knew the ache of being dismissed. He had built this cafe to erase that pain, for others. Instead, he had institutionalized it. His shame deepened into something else. Anger, no, resolve. He stepped back inside, invisible no longer. He followed the scent again, deeper this time, past the prep area, and there, in the staff dining space, he saw them. 4 employees, seated comfortably, wine in mismatched mugs, laughter easy and careless, salmon, steaks, pasta adorned with fresh herbs. A cook shaved truffles onto his own plate with a smirk. Jackson stared. This wasn't sharing. This was a banquet stolen from the people who never had a seat. And something in him, something quiet, something sacred, finally snapped. It wasn't hunger that kitchen fed. It was greed. And Jackson stood right in the middle of it, invisible yet exposed. Not a guest, not an owner, just a witness to the slow corruption of something once sacred. He took a cautious step back into the shadows, swallowed by the hum of casual betrayal. Laughter drifted from the break room like a haunting melody. "So, who's up tomorrow?" someone asked. "Marcus," Brianna replied. "I got today." A chorus of agreement followed. "That rosado was insane." "And the steaks," another voice chimed in. "Best we've ever done." They laughed, not in nervous guilt, but with the comfort of routine. Jackson's heart dropped. This wasn't some isolated moment of indulgence. They had a system, a schedule, a rotation. Every day someone new dined like royalty, all while customers outside got cold cuts and cheap bread. One of the voices joked, "Perks of the job, right?" No shame, no fear. Jackson's jaw tightened. This wasn't theft driven by hunger. It was theft rooted in privilege, theft by entitlement, not just tolerated, but normalized. It wasn't neglect, it was a culture, a structure. And every bite they stole came from the soul of the place he built, from the very people he promised to protect, including the young delivery driver he just watched walk away, dismissed and unseen. He turned toward the back exit, fists clenched. But before he could escape the rising bile in his throat, a familiar voice pierced the air. "Phil." Jackson froze behind a stack of boxes. His assistant manager, his trusted second-in-command, rolled a cart toward the exit. On it, vacuum-sealed steaks, premium seafood, unopened wine bottles, ingredients that never made it to the menu. Luxury in plain sight. Phil glanced over his shoulder. Thought he was alone. Jackson didn't move. Couldn't. He watched as Phil popped open the trunk of his car and began loading the goods. Smooth, fast, efficient. This wasn't the first time. Jackson's mind raced, not in confusion, but in recognition. This wasn't one bad apple. This was rot at the root. Phil, the man who once said, "We're like family here," had been the one bleeding the family dry. When Phil drove off, calm as ever, Jackson stepped into the now empty hallway. His breath shallow, his pulse uneven. His cafe, his home, wasn't being robbed. It was being led by thieves. He leaned against the wall, letting the solid wood steady him. But inside, everything felt hollow. He whispered into the emptiness, "My cafe, my home, it's become a den of thieves." The words burned in his throat more than the betrayal. He remembered the first year, scrubbing the floors himself, wiping down tables with cracked fingers, brewing coffee with heart, greeting every customer with hope. Now people like him, workers, dreamers, were being denied while his staff dined on the stolen promise of his vision, and they smiled while doing it. Jackson pressed his hand flat against the wall, trying to find something real, something still honest. But what hurt most wasn't the deception. It was that he had missed it, that he had trusted. That night, Jackson sat alone in his apartment. No lights, no noise, just the blue glow of his laptop, his face blank, but his hands moved with resolve. Search after search, hidden cameras, audio mics, motion triggers. If words couldn't reveal the truth, images would. He filled his cart. Click, purchase, delivery express. This wasn't a cafe anymore. It was a crime scene. And tomorrow, he'd gather evidence, not hope. He leaned back, eyes to the ceiling, letting the stillness solidify his decision. If they want to play games, he whispered, I'll play smarter. By noon, the devices were in place. Small black lenses nestled behind menu boards, under counters, between air vents. Jackson moved like a ghost through the walls he once built with love. And just like before, nobody noticed him. They never did. His fingers moved with precision. Angle, test, confirm. Footage fed straight to his phone. The kitchen, the storeroom, even the trash bins. Every secret now had an audience. He checked the final camera and exhaled slowly. Something inside him, long buried, surfaced. A tired smile. Not from triumph, from clarity. For once, he wasn't guessing. He was watching, and soon, they would know. Jackson picked up his delivery bag and slipped out into the sun. Behind him, red lights blinked, silent witnesses to the truth. The next day, he didn't wear his old delivery jacket. He wore a suit, dark, fitted, crisp, not flashy, just undeniable. When he pushed open the cafe's front door, the bell above rang like a call to judgment. Heads turned. Jenna at the hostess stand blinked. Recognition flickered. Then her face went pale. Servers paused mid-step. Silence rippled across the dining room like wind through tall grass. Jackson's steps were slow, measured. His eyes weren't pleading anymore. They were cold, focused. He walked to the center of the room, placed his laptop bag on the nearest table. Calm, controlled, every movement precise. He connected his phone to the cafe's sound system. His voice echoed through the room. Staff, step forward. Customers, please remain seated. No raised tone, no theatrics, but power doesn't need to yell. Silence followed. Uneasy glances passed between the tables. Slowly, reluctantly, the staff moved toward the counter. One by one. Jenna, Brianna, Marcus, faces he once saw as family. Behind them, customers sat frozen, confused, curious. A cafe meant to be a sanctuary now felt like a courtroom. Jackson didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply began. I promised this cafe was for everyone. He looked directly at Brianna. But it seems you rewrote that rule. Still, no outrage, just truth. My name is Jackson. He paused. I own this cafe. A single breath, and then shock. Gasps from the crowd. Brianna's face drained of color. Jenna's lips parted, but no words came. And yesterday, Jackson continued, I walked in here wearing a delivery jacket. His voice cracked, but only for a second. You treated me like I didn't belong, like I didn't matter. You didn't even look at me. He met every eye, one by one. I was kicked out of my own cafe. Silence. Jackson's voice dropped. But today, you're going to look. He opened his laptop. One click. The screen, usually reserved for menu specials, flickered, then played. First, a clip of Brianna, scooping truffle oil, laughing, gasps. Next, Marcus, plating filet steaks, cutting salmon, laughter in the background, voices clear. Serve the ones who matter. Drivers can wait. A woman at table 3 covered her mouth. A man at the counter stood. More clips. Wine poured in staff mugs. Full meals behind closed doors. laughter, luxury. Then Philippines, loading his car. Jackson said nothing. The screen went black, but silence stayed. This wasn't a cafe anymore. It had been a lie. Mrs. Peterson stood first, her designer coat suddenly heavy. "I got special meals," she whispered. "All this time, people were turned away for me." Nobody responded. She turned to Brianna. "You smiled at me," while closing the door on others. No reply. A man near the window slammed down his coffee. "You lied to us," another voice, shaken. "We paid for this." The betrayal wasn't just Jackson's anymore. It belonged to everyone in the room. Jackson scanned the room, not for applause, but for understanding. The faces that once smiled easily now carried the weight of reckoning. Customers who had unknowingly benefited from the silent exclusion policy looked down, not with guilt for asking, but sorrow for receiving what was denied to others. Mrs. Peterson lowered herself back into her chair slowly, her untouched plate now a symbol of something spoiled. Outside, life moved on. People passed the windows with no idea that inside, a reckoning had arrived. But Jackson saw it clearly now. The people in this room weren't just watching the truth. They were feeling it. And it was hard to digest. He clicked once more. A photo appeared on the screen, handwritten, unfiltered. Simple. At the top, "Do not serve below it." Delivery drivers, construction workers, tourists, cheap tippers. People leaned forward. A visible shudder moved through the crowd. Mrs. Peterson covered her mouth. The construction worker clenched his fists, not in rage, but in something deeper, hurt. Jackson's voice cut through the silence. "This isn't a rumor. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is policy." A waitress stumbled back. Someone whispered the word like it was poison. "Blacklist." And there it was, naked, undeniable. He didn't speak for sympathy. He spoke for clarity. "In this cafe," he said softly, "people weren't judged by their order. They were judged by their clothes." That hit harder than the footage. Because this wasn't just theft. It was discrimination. And it was written in ink. Jackson stepped forward. His voice didn't need to rise. The truth was already deafening. Brianna, Marcus, Jenna, Phil. Each name was deliberate. A verdict in itself. "You're done. Effective immediately. Collect your things. Leave." Phil tried to speak. Jackson raised a hand. "You didn't just steal food," he said. "You stole this cafe's soul." One by one, the names walked out. Heads lowered. No drama. Just consequence. Some customers watched in silent fury, others in mourning. Jackson didn't flinch. He turned to the room. "This cafe belongs to the people we turned away." Then, even softer, so it cut deeper. "From this day forward, no one gets judged by their job." A beat passed. Heads nodded. No cheers, just quiet affirmation. The last employee walked out. The door clicked shut, and silence wrapped the room like a second skin. Jackson stood alone, not triumphant, not broken, just breathing. He looked around, tables half filled, coffee cooling, faces unsure whether to stay or go. His eyes landed on the hand-carved "Welcome All" sign by the entrance. He had hung it himself, full of hope. Now it felt like a lie. Jackson's shoulders dropped. The cafe wasn't busy. It wasn't alive. It was broken, and honest for the first time in a long while. The air smelled of stale coffee and quiet shame. He closed his eyes, let the moment sit. When he opened them, Luis stood quietly near the kitchen door, mop in hand, not as staff, not as witness, just a man unsure what to do next. Jackson walked to him, slow and deliberate. "You believed in this place," he said. Luis shook his head. "I just clean." Jackson smiled, tired but sure. "Number you cared." Then Jackson reached into his pocket, pulled out a single key, the master key. He placed it in Luis's hand. "You're the manager now." Luis didn't move. "Me?" You treat people right. That's what matters. Luis's fingers curled around the key like it might vanish. I don't know how to run a cafe. I'll teach you, Jackson said. Luis looked down at the key. It didn't feel like a promotion. It felt like trust. And trust weighs more than power. His eyes misted, but he held it together. Jackson placed a hand on his shoulder. A small act, but in that moment, it meant everything. For the first time in his life, someone believed in the janitor. And Luis felt it. Jackson turned to the customers. Starting today, he said, this cafe will serve everyone. A pause. And I mean everyone. He looked around. Drivers, construction workers, students, nurses, tourists, even if you can't afford a meal. He let it settle. We're starting something new. The community plate, one free meal every day for anyone who needs it. A woman wiped her eyes. Luis stood beside him, firm and ready. Jackson's voice softened. No one leaves hungry. Not here, not anymore. The crowd nodded. Some smiled. One man clapped. Then another. Not loud, but real. The cafe had been cracked open, and now it could breathe again. In the days that followed, the cafe changed. Quietly, but deeply. Delivery drivers sat where they were once turned away. Construction workers sipped soup. Students studied in corners. Nurses finally found warmth. No one rushed. No one stared. People were served, not judged. Luis, in a neat apron, greeted every guest with care. The staff, new, humble, respectful. Meals? Simple, but honest. And Jackson? He sat in his usual corner, coffee in hand, eyes scanning, watching, not to control, but to witness. The cafe wasn't perfect, but it was breathing. Again, he saw it in the way people lingered, not just to eat, but to stay. No blacklist, no categories, just kindness, just humanity. Behind the counter, Luis trained 2 new hires. You don't just serve food, he said, voice calm. You serve people. He pointed to the door. Drivers, nurses, students, tourists, anyone. They nodded. Luis smiled. Remember that. He showed them how to pour coffee, how to carry plates, how to look people in the eye and see them. Jackson watched, not as a boss, not as a stranger, but as someone finally home. At closing time, he stepped outside. The street was quiet. He looked up. The sign still hung above. Davenport Café. The paint chipped, the edges weathered, but still standing. Just like him. He remembered the first day, standing here telling himself, this place will be different. And maybe now, it was. Behind the window, he saw Luis wiping down tables, a driver sipping coffee, a nurse wrapping her sandwich, a student lost in a textbook. Jackson's eyes softened. The dream didn't die. It had waited. And tonight, it woke again. He stood in the doorway, whispered to no one and everyone. I used to be a delivery driver. A pause. I know what a good meal feels like. Another breath. And I know what it means to be seen. His hand rested on the frame. I built this place for people like me. Simple truth. Heavy meaning. He watched as Luis served the last cup of the night. His throat tightened, not from grief, but from understanding. Some dreams don't die, they just wait. Tonight, his was awake. And Jackson whispered, not as a businessman, but as the man he used to be. No one deserves to be turned away. Not here, not ever again. Because if you've ever been judged by your clothes, if someone ever looked past you because of your job, if you've ever felt invisible, this story is yours, because no one should ever be made to feel small for being who they are, not for what they wear, not for what they do, not for what others assume. So share this story, not to expose a cafe, but to remind someone out there, you matter. Because right now, somewhere, someone like Jackson is still standing outside a door, wondering if they belong. Let them know they do.